Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Yeah,
Welcome, everyone who's on live stream.
Hello. Has anybody else joined us, either on the telephone or on live stream? Miss Lila? Okay.
So while it's a little bit after 7, why don't we get started? And why don't we get started with how did the reading go for everyone?
Good.
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 It was fun.
Fun?
I had completely forgotten about Jezebel.
Yeah.
And there she was. I was like, now what'd she do again? And then I was like, oh.
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 Goes on and on. Elijah and Elisha.
Yeah, Elijah and Elisha.
Those stories.
Well, did the people find the reading hard, easier,
redundant.
redundant?
Oh, no, right. I'm wrong.
Redundant.
Go ahead, Lila.
Yeah, I was echoing the redundancy part.
Yeah.
Assuming like the repetition.
A lot of kings, and they all start sounding the same after a while. They were good, or they did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and they did so many years in Judah or Israel, and tough to keep them straight.
I kept thinking I would love to be the good benchmark, and I would not like to be the bad benchmark. Because did what was right in the eyes of God, like his father David before him, or did what was evil in the eyes of God, and they mentioned the same person over and over again as a negative benchmark of evilness, of reigning. I'm thinking
Right.
it was the same person, but I can't remember who it was.
Jeroboam.
Jeroboam.
Son of Nebat. But I find that kind of unfair, to be honest. I mean, generations later, they still give him the blame for doing the wrong things. I was like,
come on, y'all.
Own up.
Going up to your own stuff.
Exactly.
The curse to the third, 10 generations, it falls within the...
Well, I don't know if it necessarily was that in the case of the kings. It seems like people were generally judged by their actions, but it was just that, this one was like David, and this one was like
Jeroboam.
Basically, they kept saying that because you turned your back against God, you're a German.
Right.
So it's a situation that they were like the other one, but they all had a choice to go back to Jehovah. However, they chose not to.
Right.
So that was the passages.
Right.
Yeah. And then too, a lot of them started off okay. Most of them started off all right, and then I think a lot of them have got into bad company, or a wife, or somebody turned their head. All of a sudden, they switched up midstream and started following what they wanted to do, Baal, or just doing what they pretty much want to do.
Right. Well, Lila, did you have any sort of general impressions of the reading this week?
Yeah, my general impression was it seemed that, like someone mentioned this earlier, like you were kind of doomed if one of your fathers did something sort of wrong. If you either stayed on the right side and doing what Lord wanted, but if you didn't, when the kings would do things that was displeasing to the Lord, they really, it seemed like not just those persons were disciplined, but generations after were affected by it. I thought that was very interesting.
Right. And did someone else join us on the phone?
Yeah, Rose is here.
Hi, Rose.
Hey, Rose.
Hi, everybody. I couldn't find the phone number, but I was halfway listening on live stream.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting because we have a number of interesting kings in the reading. And I think I was looking online in terms of the span of time, and there were estimates online about like approximately 400 years, and 380, particularly from the split between Judah and Israel, and then the exile. So that's a long time, and if you think about it, it started to make sense, at least to me, because it's sort of like, because we're reading this in a condensed, it seems like such a short time, and so we're wondering, well, why aren't they doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're getting punished. Well, generation after generation, they're surrounded by people with different gods and all this and that. I mean, if you just look at the fact that that's more time than our country has been in existence, and think about the changes from the founding of this country versus today. I mean, it's not that surprising if you think about it.
The one thing that I wanted to know more information about was when the split after Solomon's death and the split between Israel and Judah happened. Jehovah or somebody sets himself up as king, and where Judah and Israel split, and David's line continues with the one king, and then well, where did this other? I think he was from a Benjaminite family,
right?
And so I thought that the text just introduces this split, and it left me wanting to know more. Because I'm sure that history is rich with how did these tribes decide to go with this king, and the other tribes decide to go with the other king, and then over the course of these years, sometimes there were wars with outsiders, and sometimes they were battling Judah and Israel amongst them.
Well, all of these tribes are children of Israel. Number one, and when they split, and because Solomon overtaxed the people, and they asked his son to lay off some of the taxes that they were putting on them. That's when because they wouldn't one side, so that's when they split. Because
so that's what it was about the taxes.
Because they felt that they were being overcharged.
Okay.
Well, that's part of this. Yeah, that's part of the story.
Yeah, it's part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
He was on the line.
But then also because of Solomon. Solomon
was using all the money to build the temple.
But also the fact because Solomon had sinned, and God said, "Okay." He told David, Jehovah told David that I will divide your kingdom, but I won't do it because first of all, going back to David, because Uzziah's wife Hittite. So because of this, I'm not going to divide the kingdom with your son, but after his death, the kingdom will be divided. Because he saw everything talk about Solomon. Solomon was we talk about him being a wise man, but he was only blessed because he was the son of David. Because of your father David, I promise to do this. Not that Solomon was a righteous man.
Actually, in the beginning he was. Go ahead.
I'll let someone else speak, but
no.
He asked for the right thing, right? He asked for wisdom, or to discern what is right and what is wrong. So, I think the reward of his life, if you want to see all the blessings that he, received afterwards, were not just because he was David's son. I think he was also in his own right, making a good choice when he was given the opportunity. Well, ask God what you want. And he's like, I don't know what I would have picked.
But later in life, he had a thorn in his side, and that was women.
Yeah.
And
he loved him some women, for sure.
1,000 women, 300 wives, and 700 concubines.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm just envisioning this. What was once a very wise man, who the whole world would come see. Then suddenly, like his weakness clearly was women, And I'm sure those wives were like, oh, come on, let me build that Asherah pole. You know, okay, yeah, go ahead.
In his old age.
And in his old age, that was what caused, and then God still said, you know, you sinned, you know, but I'm not going to tear it out of your hand while you're alive, but it's going to come out of your son's hand.
Yeah, I think he left him with 2 tribes because of the promise God had made him. He had made a promise not to, you know, to leave him, you know, so he couldn't exactly take everything, all the tribes from him. He left him with 2. And the other ones went their way.
So one kingdom had 2 tribes, and the other kingdom had the 10 tribes.
Right. But because he had Judah and Benjamin.
Benjamin.
Okay. Did I miss?
But there were a couple that were still on the other side of the river, though, right? 2.5.
2.5.
That were on the other side of the river. So the rest of that is what the Judah.
Okay.
Oh, I should probably open the door because it looks like it might be messy.
But I wanted to add also that, I mean, so what you're saying, Dr. Darrell, from your perspective, I partially agree with, because lineage is important in these days, and so the lineage, and I agree that, you know, Solomon asked for I think God was impressed with what he asked for when he was given the world as his oyster. And I don't know. I'm with you, Knut. I don't know what I would have asked for if God said, "Ask me for anything. Go ahead." I don't know. And the other piece of that, from what you were mentioning, or I think you were mentioning about the taxes, the person who became the king, if I'm remembering my stories correctly, consulted with the elders to say, what should I do? And the elders rightly said, decrease the burden on your subjects. And then he turned to people his own age or younger to say, oh, what should I do? Crush them. You know, put them in between your fingers and let them know who's boss. And that's what he did. And guess what happened? And so and the other piece for me is that he built an alternate worship site. So not wanting people to go to Jerusalem. I don't know if this is the same king. I think it is. That he built an alternate worship site that ended up being.
It was
Jeroboam.
When they split.
And
so
and they didn't split right. I mean, the beginning they didn't split until after Jeroboam did what he did. Then they split. Then they split. Right.
Yes. So after the split, the king built an alternate worship site because he didn't want people to have to go down to the southern kingdom to worship and maybe not come back.
But the ark stayed at the temple in Jerusalem.
It did.
Solomon's temple.
Okay.
So if there were going to be good Jews, then they would have to go down there, and thus ended up, in my understanding, the religious war of theology between the Samaritans and the Israelites. That was the beginning.
Well, there was, I don't know how many people finished the reading for today, but there was something very enlightening that explained a lot that I must admit, because once you get into Chronicles, you know, it's sort of like blah, 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 blah.
Come on now. That's important names and important lineage.
But,
it's genealogy.
You know, I don't know if I caught this the last times that I read, was where it says Jesse was the father of, okay, I'm going to try these words.
Where are you there?
It's 1 Chronicles, 2nd chapter, verse 13. It says, Jesse was the father of Eliab, his firstborn. The second son was Abinadab. The third, Shimea. The fourth, Nathanael. The fifth, Radai. The sixth, Ozem. The seventh, David. Then it says their sisters were Zeruiah and Abigail. Zechariah's 3 sons was Abishai, Joab, and Asahel. And Abigail was the mother of Amasa, whose father was So that whole, it explains that whole incident where Joab wound up killing or, orchestrating the death of Amasa, and it's like, and then realizing they're all related.
Mm-hmm.
Even the, reading this little bit here, and it just shows how.
Where were you reading from?
Yeah.
It's
13.
Chronicles 2,
13.
13, Jesse.
Remember I shared with you that this is a family feud?
Jesse, yeah.
Yes,
This is
but
all-
not even a distant family.
No,
feud.
close.
These were close. These
The
were close
Israelites were
cousins.
the descendants of Ishmael,
Right.
who was the,
But Amasa was the commander of the Israelite army, who was going to basically take Joab's place, and then Joab,
Had him.
yeah.
Adam.
So what did people? Joab was an interesting character. What did people think about Joab, the commander of David's army?
I think he was ambitious, beyond ambitious. He wouldn't let family ties get in the way. If you was in the way, because according to this, Amazon must have been his cousin.
Uh-huh.
So he was willing to even kill close relatives like that. If you got in his way, he was going to erase you.
Yeah, I mean, what I found, on the one hand, Joab did David a lot of favors, and he had David's back, and he helped David keep David's hands clean. He
When
did
King
the dirty
Saul.
work, but then at the same time, he was like scheming and
Like you said,
underhanded.
ambitious.
Any thoughts on those of you on the phone? Lila, Rose?
Well, as it relates to David, I was just going back over my notes. There was just so much sort of remember or whatever. But I thought as it relates, not as it relates to that, but it relates to David and Joshua. One of the interesting aspects I saw that I read was when David tells Joshua that he loves him, and that he loves him even more than he loves women.
Oh, you mean
Jonathan.
Jonathan?
The
Jonathan.
question you just asked, but I thought that was very interesting as it relates to David and his relationship with Joshua.
You mean
Jonathan.
Jonathan?
Mhm.
Jonathan, yeah.
I was like, I missed that.
Did you see that? Did you see that?
Yeah.
But yes, their relationship is very
very
special.
close. And Jonathan made David a cloak that you make for your wife, and that's why Saul was upset with Jonathan, because he had given this to David that symbolized the relationship was more than just a friendly relationship. And that was a situation with they were that close that he could. There was, and so that's one of the issues, that when Saul was upset with Jonathan, Saul to kill Jonathan himself because of the relationship he had with David. So.
So did anyone else notice that through all of this time, God didn't abandon them? God kept sending prophets. There were prophets throughout. We saw Elijah. We saw Elisha. We saw Isaiah.
They just kind of pop up out of nowhere
they
in the
pop
story.
And there was a woman prophet. Does anyone know who that woman prophet's name is? What was that?
You
Are you
okay?
okay?
Sorry, that was me putting the dish away.
Huldah.
I'll put it back on mute.
Huldah, who was, this is the curious, it was all exciting toward the end when Josiah, he clearly had an interest in fixing up the temple and everything. He sent people in there, And
Right.
they were like, we
And-
found this book of the law.
Let's read it.
And you would think that the priests would be the ones that would know, but they're directed to go and consult this prophetess Huldah, who had to give them instruction in terms of what to do.
I think part of the issue is that they were not, even to the prophets and stuff, the priests and stuff, they were not continuing the teachings that they were supposed to continue about how to do things in the temple. They weren't always following themselves. They weren't telling their children how to do things. I'm assuming this is why some of them didn't know how to do these things.
Right.
Even though they were priests, it was not carried on the tradition of being taught by the fathers and stuff.
Right. So someone had mentioned, I don't know whether it was before we started or what have you, but mentioned the whole story about Jezebel and Ahab, and what did people think about that whole story between Ahab and Jezebel? And
I thought it was interesting how Nahab reappears later in Kings. His vineyard is mentioned. I forget where, but it was interesting how Nahab. The topic comes up again. Yeah.
But she was, to me too, she was willing.
can you speak up?
Oh, she was willing to conspire to get this man's inheritance. He wouldn't sell it to her because he said that was in his family. That's they took a good well, how you said they laid a lot of importance to inheritance.
Right.
This is something my father's father passed on to me. And he said, no. Ahab threw a tantrum, kind of like one of my grandkids would have done, because he couldn't get what he wanted. Similar to somebody else we know right now. But anyway, he threw a tantrum like that. And she just pretty much set this man up.
Right.
For him to not only lose his life over what a piece of land that he probably could have had. He probably had tons of land, right. But he wanted just that particular land. She set these people up to lie, caused this man to get killed, and then took over his property.
Right.
Who does that?
Horrible.
Yeah. So she had a reputation, and it was earned.
I mean, I got the impression throughout here, just like, unfortunately, like what we've talked about before, that there isn't a lot of depth about a lot of women. And it's similar here, but you can see both good and bad influence from women. You see the good, and I'm wondering, when all of the kings, when they talk about who their mother was, it occurred to me, especially since a lot of the good kings became kings when they were really young. And part of me was wondering whether it was because of the influence of their mother, and whether their mother was, devoted, and so I just thought about that, the influence of the mother, with a lot of the kings that were mentioned.
Well, the interesting thing in Judaism, the lineage is passed through the mother's side. So that's why they always concerned about the son marrying a Jewish woman, because that's the side of the lineage.
You have Jewish blood only if you were born from a Jewish mother.
So that's Jewish mother.
Back to the women's, that you don't get a lot of backstory with a lot of women in the Bible. But Jezebel was mentioned that she was the daughter of a king. I forget which king, from where. But when she finally does get her due, and she's thrown off the wall and dogs eat her, I forget who says, all that was found of her is her head and her hands and her feet, but they must be buried because she was of royal heritage. Yeah. So
even with those actions, she still, because of her lineage,
she's royal, yeah,
got a burial plot.
But it's never clear if the women, who were queens, right? Jezebel was a queen.
Mm-hmm.
It never specifies if they then too, their bones are laid to rest in the house of David or wherever, are just the men buried there? I mean, as you say, the women, somebody had to give birth to these kings. Is not their mother is also to have a place in the burial?
That's a good question.
Well, I think someone brought this up like an earlier year. I wish that these, books of the annals of the kings of Israel is like, as for the other stuff from the
are they not written?
Yeah, because everybody knows.
And I'm wondering if stuff like that was included in those other books, because I think here they really just focus on, the kings and where they're buried. I didn't necessarily read into that the women were not, necessarily buried elsewhere, but I just think this was written clearly, maybe as short summaries of what's in these bigger books that were out there.
There were other writings in them.
Right, because I think my understanding with royalty is that usually there is someone writing down an account of all of their goings on.
What they say and what they do.
Right.
But I think, but I go back to the fact that, in particular in this writings, there's so much. It's just a patrilineal line. Mm-hmm. They didn't do the matrilineal, and that's why that's why we're dealing with some of the issues today with some of the changes of pronouns. We're talking about instead of changing it to mother and father God and that kind of stuff, so everyone's included and not just one side of it. But I think that's what they did. I mean, only thing I remember, I think Abraham is linked. So he was buried with his wife Sarah. Because they bought the tomb, and he was also buried with his wife. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason. I'm glad you mentioned that. I never really thought about that before.
Right.
That's what I remember.
I don't know.
Well, talking about the theme of women, what do you think about the Shunammite's wife? Remember her? She was a buddy of Elisha.
She couldn't have children first? Her?
Yes, and then she had a
son.
Okay.
And
by his prophecy.
And she was the one that told her husband, we need to create a room here so whenever he comes and
have a place to stay. He had his own couch.
I know.
Hang out.
Yeah, I found that interesting too.
Yeah, there are seeds of stories about women in here, and what I find striking is, especially in more recent history, what I mean, like the 1500s, the 1600s, all this and that, and there are a lot of communities throughout history where it was like, even today, where women aren't supposed to do certain things. So you're not even supposed to be in the same room, alone with a man or something like that. And you look at here, they weren't stressed about any of that. I mean, no one, just like we were talking before about, like, earlier on with Moses, and then later we'll read with Jesus meeting women at the well and stuff like that. It clearly wasn't considered forbidden for men, to interact with women, who were not related, etc.
It became taboo.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to look back. I found where, because it was bothering me, Naboth, whose vineyard was taken, right, by Jezebel's setup, is mentioned again in 2 Kings 9, verses 21, where Jehu kills Joram and Ahaziah. And it says in 2 Kings 9, verse 21, they met him at the plot of ground that had belonged to Naboth, the Jezreelite.
And if there was an underscore, it would be bum bum bum.
Yeah. So that's sorry. Okay, back to
What was the king of Israel when it wasn't Joram, I don't think. It was some there was just some humorous things here where the king of Israel, wants to, go to war. He calls king of Judah, come out with me as the king of Judah comes out. He's like, well, have you inquired of the Lord before we go out? And the king of Israel is like, well,
No,
call the priest. And
they
he's
always
like, no.
say no.
And he's like, well, isn't there basically a true prophet here? Well, there's one, but he never has anything.
Right, he never says what I want him to say.
That's Kings 26.
And when he asks him the question, and the prophet,
Kings 26.
and the prophet says, "Oh yeah, go ahead." He goes, "No, tell me the truth.
You're not gonna make
You're lying." Okay, don't go.
You're gonna be killed. Yeah.
But go ahead, Reverend.
Oh no, I had something different.
No, well, I really wanted, because there was a lot in here about prophets like Elijah and Elisha, and I mean and I saw parallels between miracles that Jesus performed, and which probably explains later on why people kind of question, is this Elijah who's come back to us? But some of the stories, like he and Elisha brought, someone back to life. Even what it was Elisha who, even after he died, there was a body thrown in and touched his
bones, and then came back to life.
And then Elijah went up in a chariot, and Elisha clearly knew he was leaving that day, and he's like, I'm going to go over here. And he's like, well, I'm coming with you.
Yeah.
And then
all the prophets, all the those 40 people, those 40 guys.
Yes.
Oh, stay right here with, do you know your master's going to be taken up today? Oh, yeah. Well, stay here with us. Oh, no, I'm going. I'm going with him.
Right. But he asked for a double portion.
Right.
And the Spirit told him that, well, if you see your master going up, then you got to be there to get your double portion.
Big incentive.
Well, and that's how Muhammad in the Quran ascends to heaven. There's a chariot that comes, so it mirrors.
Yeah, parallel.
Yeah. So, what you're talking about the prophets Elijah and Elisha? What struck me this week was how often they're able to call upon God, and God appears, and God smites, the 50 men that were sent by the king, and the king sends another bunch of 50 men, and then Elijah, blasts them.
Suicide mission.
Yeah.
The king says go, and the first 50 die, and then the king says go. And the second 50
well, the third guy was smart. He was like, before you
smite me. But, yeah, some of the, and maybe, when we get to the 4 major prophets and the 12 minor prophets later, I kind of have always wondered, why doesn't Elijah and Elisha have their own book? Because they seem to have more juju than some of these other prophets. They can't hold I would say they can't hold a candle. But I mean, wow, Elijah and Elisha are really just blowing them away, literally.
Well, who was it? Was it Isaiah though? I mean, later on in the reading, I was just shaking my head with, was it Hezekiah?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, he's doing well. He's trying to do what's right. Then he just has to show off everything.
Where's Hezekiah?
This is in 2 Kings. It's probably actually it's a little later.
It's like, well, what did you show them?
I
showed them everything. I showed them all the corners of my kingdom.
And I mean, I can just see, I don't know what Isaiah looked like, but I just see this facial expression like, oh my gosh.
What did you do?
You just gave them a reason to come in and take everything.
But that's what Solomon did, though. When it came to Solomon's kingdom, he showed them all the riches, everything he had, so they had their mind was set, but they're gonna come back and get all this gold, because he showed them everything as well. He showed them everything.
I don't know if he showed them everything. I got the impression that Hezekiah even took them into the treasuries of the temple. I don't think I think when people went to see Solomon, they knew there was wealth, but Solomon also showed power. Mm-hmm. It was very clear to anyone who visited Solomon, there's no way that we would be able to defeat him.
Well, they recognized that the Lord God was with him as his father David, but Solomon had 40 years of peace. He was not a man of war. So over those 40 years, he did a lot of stuff, as we know, because so I think they began to show people the tabernacle and all the furniture that was in there and all this gold and stuff. I think they get same to Hezekiah. They get ahead of themselves. They get puffed up and they want to show off and brag. And you're right. This is the thing that happens. The enemy sees it and comes in and takes it.
It often happens when people that have nice homes or whatever that are robbed. It's often not, but it's sometimes by acquaintances that happen to be there, and we're like, nice stuff here.
Yeah. So
a lot of times it's people you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what did anyone?
I thought it was interesting. One of the things I was found very interesting was Amon and Tamar. That Amon falling in love with his sister and then raping her and then hating her.
Yeah, where is
that created?
Yeah, and where is that? I'm sorry to keep asking, but
it's in the. I'm sorry. It's in the first part of.
I think
it's in the first part of the reading.
Second Samuel.
I'm sorry.
Second Samuel.
Kings 1. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, Kings. First Kings.
I think it's child of
I'll try to find it.
David. He wanted her so bad they got her.
His sister.
Yeah.
Yes. He conspired.
But the fact that created such sort of a war, and that his brother was trying to avenge that wrongdoing of Amon.
Yeah.
2 Samuel 13.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Amon and Tamar.
Yeah, that was a bad situation.
I mean, that
right?
sounded like he was obsessed.
He was. Until he got what he wanted. And then he was done.
He was done.
Right.
Because you're no longer a virgin, you
I
can get a
can't
bride.
live without you.
Yeah.
I gotta have you right now. Okay, I got you. Okay, get out of my sight.
That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It just, that probably blew her mind too.
Well, and she tried to tell him, don't do this thing.
Right.
Right.
Now that you've done it, fine, do the right thing. It's like, no, get out of my sight.
But her brother, her blood brother, full brother, waited a while, took her home, waited till the right moment to get his revenge.
So,
Told her, don't say nothing to nobody. I got this.
so what do you think? What do you think about what David did with Bathsheba and Uriah. I found it interesting later where it said David was perfect except for this.
This one little footnote.
But what I found in 2 Samuel, it was interesting when they talked about David's mighty warriors, and it listed like the 3 and then the 30, even though there were 37. I assume maybe they would fill an empty position with someone, so maybe that's why there was 37. But Uriah the Hittite was listed among. So that told me that he wasn't just some random, warrior or soldier. He was someone that David probably, was pretty familiar with, and then to still set him up to be killed.
He was the leader of men.
Just for his wife.
Yeah.
And that's why when they pulled him back in, he said he wouldn't go sleep with his wife. He said, "I can't do this. My other men out there, they're not with their family, so I won't go in there to her. I'll sleep outdoors."
So he found out she was pregnant. He made her pregnant.
Oh,
he was trying to cover.
David knew.
David had made Bathsheba pregnant, and he wanted to cover that up.
Right.
So he sent her. He tried to send her husband back to sleep with her,
and he turned out to be honorable.
Right.
Because he said, "I can't. Why should I do this with my men out there, and they're not with their."
Right.
He did 2 days in a row. He stepped outdoors. He didn't go home.
I'd like to talk about Elijah.
Okay.
I think he's an interesting figure. What's the matter?
your assumption.
My assumption about Elijah, or my conclusion about Elijah. I've come to the conclusion. I'm not sure if I'll share that, but I do want to share that he goes through a series of mood swings that is phenomenal, and that leads him to conclude that he is the only one that's left serving God, and God disabuses him of that notion.
Yeah.
Hey, how about these 4,000 people over here? And so to kill the prophets of Baal, or to really show a force, like you're saying, come with it, to show the prophets of Baal, even teases and taunts, which may or may not be necessary. But then going to the hills and being face to face or face to back with God, and then going under the tree, God, kill me now, and then feeling like that kind of a modern day explanation of that kind of mood shift and swing to me
bipolar.
Feels like bipolar.
Bipolar.
Or bipolar depression, or bipolarness. And so from the way it's described, the high highs and the low lows, and even with that, God uses him to the fullest extent. And so I see that as a great victory to talk about, perhaps to talk about mental health and mental illness.
Wow, that's a great observation. I hadn't even thought about it in that way. Thank you.
Yeah, I never thought of that. It's the same way with the King Saul. He got in the bad spirit, and then the music soothed him. That's why we know how. Right. So he was. What was he? He was bipolar. He had mental health.
Or he certainly suffered from a deep depression after all the stuff that happened to him.
Yeah.
And music therapy, equine therapy, dog therapy.
Well, I know the last meeting I pointed out mental health popped up because he kept forgetting who David was. That's what struck me this time reading. He would go after David, and then David would do something and then approach him and say, I could have killed you. And he's like, David, is that you? And so it struck me, last week, it reminded me, just having, people in my family who struggle with dementia. It seemed very because sometimes you see frustration and also sometimes hostility because of frustration with someone with dementia, and then mood swings, but things like music oftentimes soothe them. So when I was reading Saul's story this time, it kind of reminded me of maybe someone who was struggling, because it just struck me like, you know who David is. So why would you ask, who are you? Oh, David, is that you? Well, you were just chasing him. And that happened a number of times.
Well, I kept saying so, but an evil spirit came upon Saul. So every time he an evil spirit, which could have been what we consider dementia,
right.
But he wasn't that way all the time. But an evil spirit came upon him, and then he decided to do this and try to kill David and try to kill Jonathan, because the evil spirit came upon him. And the music was the thing. You're right, that soothed him, and that was probably right.
So what do people think about the Queen of Sheba? Who was the Queen of Sheba?
She got game.
Yeah, she came and she tested Solomon with very hard questions. And plus, she bought him a lot of stuff when she came.
And
I think she took stuff back with her.
Yeah, because I think it was an interchange
and
of
it's also
stuff.
believed that they had a relationship too. It was believed. Solomon and Sheba.
You know, there's speculation as to who Sheba was. Some people speculate that she was someone who came from Africa. There are some who speculate that some people that speculate that perhaps she might have been the root of Judaism in Africa, because there are people even today who say that they're descendants of the ancient Israelites.
Yeah.
There's some that today that based on that and based upon their traditions that seem to be consistent with a lot of the Old Testament rituals or what have you. Some speculate that maybe they trace their roots back to either her, or later when they go into exile, you'll notice that some of the Israelites or people in Judah, escaped to Egypt and to other places. And also this time I read very carefully what the Babylonians took out the temple, and the ark was not mentioned.
Correct.
And so there's speculation that the ark was removed prior to Babylon coming in and invading, leading to theories, and the argument that the ark is now in an Ethiopian church. Ethiopia, claims that the ark is there. Other speculation, but I just this time reading it, and I was reading very carefully everything that was detailed, that the Babylonians took out the temple and the ark, was not mentioned.
What was the answer about
although I had a question, because very often they use something of their treasure as ransom, or as to buy themselves out, or time, or freedom, whatever have you. And I wondered, it never says how they replenished the things in the temple, maybe once, but they took always stuff out, like multiple times. They took all the gold and silver, and there was still gold and silver left. And I wondered, did they put some back in? Did they not really take everything out? I wasn't sure how that worked.
Yeah, I was confused by that too. It just seemed like they kept taking out the same thing. Because it seemed like several times they said they took out the items that Solomon had created and used that as ransom. And I'm thinking, well, didn't they just pay off this other country? I got the...
Well, they recaptured some of it, maybe in all the story of back and forth.
Could be.
It's probably an editing issue. They didn't compare. Bad editor.
I don't know if you remember, well, you may not remember. Haile Selassie, one of the rulers, he's said to be of the lineage of Solomon.
And he came from a line dating 2,000 years back.
And he was, and it was back in the 60s or 70s, and he, I'm not sure he died then, but he said they traced his lineage to Solomon. Solomon. Yeah, and that was always interesting.
It is interesting how.
Because before, so geopolitically, Israel was really in Africa, and then they redrew the maps and stuff. Then they moved it out, but really it was in Africa. And then the geopolitical stuff. Then they changed the boundaries and stuff like that, and then they got out of Africa. But originally it was that in Egypt, it was in Africa.
So, is there anyone on the phone that wants to chime in?
Lila?
No, I'm just following along. I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
Is Rose still on there?
Well, in the last 10 minutes, obviously in an hour we can't talk about each and every king. I think we touched on like most of the key characters. I did my usual emphasis of the women. But I mean, are there any scriptures that came out to you? I mean, one that every time I read it, like it just fascinates me. I guess because of the image of God before and even after this, where it talks about the Lord appears to Elijah, and and then so he tells Elijah to go out. He's going to go by, and then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. And it was like the one, because all before and after, it's like these great big words, thunder, a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire at night, and God's presence on the mountain. It looks like a fire, and then here God basically comes, interacts with Elijah as a gentle whisper, and that always strikes me when I read it. But are there like other passages or other things that struck people in their reading this week?
Well,
yeah.
I have a comment, and this is sort of just based on the readings in general. As I'm reading, I'm seeing, the references to fasting and how, and I don't know if we brought this up last week, but how when important decisions are made, they tend to fast. And I thought that was interesting because that's something that people still do today.
Used throughout a lot of religions and
I will say that similar to that comment, this reading just reminded me about just something that I know I continually have to work on, and that is impatience. And constantly, like the kings like David and Solomon and the kings that did good, before they made a knee-jerk reaction, they said, well, let's inquire of the Lord. And every time I read that, I'm like, no, but just go, and it was just kind of, a reminder about, not jumping into decisions, but taking the time to reflect and inquire of God before proceeding, with a decision, particularly an important one.
There's a scripture that says, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. Just acknowledge that God is God, and he will direct your path.
Pamela or Canute, we haven't heard much from you today.
One story that I found interesting was Naaman healed of leprosy. That's in 2 Kings, and he has this great expectation how this should go down. And he comes to, Elijah and says, Elijah actually, there's some other interesting way how this goes, because, first the kings of Israel are supposed to help him, but they're saying, no, that's not our job, you know. But then he comes to Elisha, and actually, you know, so Elisha tells him, well, you know, wash yourself, and that's what you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And he's angry. He's like, I expected something. You come at least out and see me, and you know,
climb the mountain and kill the lion.
This should happen, and since it doesn't happen, he doesn't accept the way to healing. Only after he gets another nudge and says, you know, well, if someone important like him tells you that this is what you should do, do it. And he does it reluctantly, and then is convinced. But I feel, you know, often I have that idea how things should, you know, we expect a solution from God, or we expect a solution to come in a certain way, and we're totally unhappy with how things unfold, and only later on we realize, you know, well, this is actually the way it was supposed to happen. In the moment we're totally unhappy. I could relate to that actually, which I thought was interesting. Even back then, people had expectations how healing or other things should go according to their plan. That was one story I liked.
I'm still trying to think of Solomon and 1,000 women. 1,000 women. Good gracious. You know, I'm just thinking in my mind, how in the world do you just... Anyway, you got 1,000 women, 1,000 women, you know what I'm saying?
We were saying earlier, women were clearly his thorn in his side, because I was just like, if you have 1,000 women, no wonder all these, you know, Asherah poles and whatever you know, I don't even think he could have controlled, you know.
Part of
Do you think that was an exaggeration? Do you think that was an exaggeration at all?
No.
I believe he had
That's a true number.
Because and part of the law of the land is that he had to still. Now this is what I say is a gross neglect, because even with concubines, you have to fulfill your husbandly duties. So all those women he's supposed to have sex with periodically, because that was the law.
God
you know, that was the rule.
Once every 3 years.
They were season, we had
a year and a half.
rotation,
a rotation.
Had more stamina than.
And he had all those children.
Well, you know, I'm thinking you got 700 wives and 300 concubines. I mean, it was a little bit greedy.
But the other women, but the other things he liked.
So
They weren't the only one.
It's interesting. You know, I chalk that up to biblical embellishment. I didn't actually think that, any more than, you know, I'm thinking back to Genesis and some of the things that, you know, Moses lived to 140 or 900 or whatever, some great, fantastic age. I'm just like, okay, well, he was old, but they didn't know how old, so they said 140.
Right.
He had, you know, so
technically, if he lived to be that long, if they lived to be 190 years old, then that woman probably wouldn't be that bad.
Right.
yeah.
Well, and if you notice, in the last couple of minutes, just a couple of things. One, related to, I had sent out a few weeks ago a handout, some research I did on numbers. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that there's a lot of 40s, 7s, similar
12s,
numbers.
10s.
I don't necessarily think some of those numbers are literal. I think that there may be a deeper
Symbolic.
meaning. In 7, the number 7 means completion, for example. So so I'm not sure. So there could be a deeper meaning in terms of the numbers being used.
Wives and concubines.
Right. And so then secondly, I don't know, I just wanted to point out that if you notice that Jezebel was killed with the help of eunuchs, and that term, you know, will come up. There's a lot of writings out there that if you're interested in looking into, there's not full agreement on it, but there's a lot of scholarship out there that suggests that eunuchs were not just, you know, what we conceive of as neutered or castrated, but was a term that may have represented sexual minorities generally. you know, in the New Testament, when we get to that, you'll notice I think it's in Matthew, where, you know, Jesus talks about divorce and marriage, and he says that there's some that basically this doesn't apply to, and that is people who are made eunuchs, born eunuchs. So what does that mean? So I just point that out because there are books out there that will look at those terms, or even terms like cupbearer, and will show at least an argument that it means sexual minorities, and could refer to LGBT people at that time. And if that's the case, you will start to see us throughout the entire Bible.
But it's always concerns me. It still does when it talks about temple prostitutes, females, but they had males, female, and they had males.
Well, that's throughout the reading.
And the thing about it for me is, I know the females could not go into even the outer court. So who were the males for?
We talked about that in previous sessions, and I thought the same thing. Exactly who were the male shrine prostitutes servicing?
I thought the men. I mean,
But
I
see,
didn't have any question about that.
But if the shrine prostitutes were, if that whole deal was about fertility, you know, it was reenacting a fertility rite, right? I mean, so if it was about fertility, what were the man?
I don't know. We can do some Googling,
research.
but it's 2 minutes after 8.
Yep.
But we've had a lively discussion, and so with that said, thank you everyone. We are gonna. I apologize in advance for Chronicles.
Ancestry.com in writing.
But I mean, it's a refresher. And like I pointed out earlier, you know, I'm catching things I didn't catch before in terms of the relationship of different people. But we are a third through the entire Bible. Literally a third through the entire Bible. So keep reading. We will come together again next Thursday. In the meantime, if there's any pressing questions, or someone does want to Google more about the shrine prostitutes and eunuchs and all this and that, and you find anything interesting, just email me and I'll send it around to the group. So does someone want to close us out in prayer? Okay, I will pray. Heavenly God, thank you for this group. Thank you for guiding us through this journey, reading the Bible in 90 days. We ask that you be with each of us as we read. We ask that you show us what you would have us learn from the reading that we're doing. Help us to grow closer to you in this process. Help us to grow closer to one another, and help us to live our lives in the way that you would have us live them. Help us to be a blessing to others as you have blessed us. Help us be blessed by this process. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you on live stream.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.